Distant echoes of creaking and groaning metal reverberated in the void, followed by a low, guttural hum that pulsed like a heartbeat. It was not mechanical, yet it wasn't entirely organic either. The sound vibrated through every surface and into the marrow of the unconscious bodies sprawled across the dark floor. Slowly, one by one, they stirred. A pale light flickered from an unseen source above, casting uneven shadows that seemed to shift and stretch unnaturally. The air was dense, heavy with an acrid tang that stung the nostrils, as if the atmosphere itself resented their presence. The walls around them appeared to be alive, rippling faintly as if breathing, a texture that was neither flesh nor metal, but some unholy fusion of the two. The first to awaken was a man, his face slack with confusion. His breathing quickened as his fingers scraped against the pulsating floor. He pushed himself upright, his hands trembling, and scanned his surroundings with wide, bloodshot eyes. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Where am I?" A groan answered from nearby. Another figure, a woman with cropped black hair matted to her forehead, stirred and sat up. Her gaze darted around the room, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm. "What the hell is this place?" she muttered, her voice low but sharp. I don't know," the man replied, his voice tinged with panic. "I was somewhere else. I can't remember." He trailed off, clutching his head as if trying to piece together fragmented memories. More groans and murmurs filled the space as others began to awaken. There were 5 of them in total, each wearing an identical, skin-tight suit of an unfamiliar material that glistened faintly in the dim light. The suits bore no insignia, no markings of origin, only a subtle grid-like pattern that shifted slightly with their movements. "Who are you people?" a gruff voice barked. It came from a stocky man with a deep scar running from his left temple to his jawline. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the group. "Where the hell are we?" We don't know," the first man stammered. "I just woke up here too." The stocky man sneered but said nothing. Instead, he turned his attention to the walls, running a calloused hand over their undulating surface. "This ain't right," he muttered. "This whole damn place, it's alive." "Alive?" a younger man asked, his voice trembling. He was thin, almost gaunt, with wide eyes that darted nervously. "What do you mean alive?" The stocky man shot him a glare. "Touch it, and see for yourself." Hesitantly, the younger man reached out and placed his hand on the wall. Instantly, the surface seemed to ripple under his touch, emitting a faint, wet squelching sound. He recoiled, wiping his hand frantically on his suit. "What the—" "Enough," the woman with the cropped hair interrupted, her voice firm. "Panicking isn't going to help. We need to figure out what's going on." She turned to the group, her gaze steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Does anyone remember anything? Anything at all?" A heavy silence settled over them. One by one, they shook their heads. I remember falling," the first man offered hesitantly. "Or maybe being pulled. It's like—" He paused, struggling to find the words. "Like the ground just disappeared beneath me, and then nothing." The woman nodded slowly. "Same. I was walking somewhere, and then everything went dark. Next thing I know, I'm here." "It's like we were taken," the younger man said, his voice barely above a whisper. The stocky man crossed his arms and huffed. "Taken by who? Or what?" Before anyone could respond, a deep, resonant sound filled the room. It was low at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew steadily louder, a bone-rattling vibration that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The group froze, their eyes darting around in panic. "What the hell is that?" the first man whispered, his voice barely audible over the noise. The light overhead flickered violently, casting erratic shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. The walls began to ripple more noticeably, as if reacting to the sound. Then, without warning, a section of the floor split open, revealing a dark, yawning void beneath. "Run!" the woman shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. She bolted toward the far end of the room, where a narrow passageway had appeared, its edges jagged and uneven. The others hesitated for only a moment before following her, their footsteps pounding against the pulsating floor. Behind them, the void expanded, consuming the space where they had been moments before. The resonant sound grew deafening, drowning out their panicked breaths and pounding hearts. As they stumbled into the passageway, the walls closed behind them with a sickening squelch, cutting off the sound and leaving them in an oppressive silence. They stood there, gasping for breath, their eyes adjusting to the dim light emanating from the walls. What the hell is this place?" the younger man finally managed, his voice trembling. The woman shook her head, her expression grim. "I don't know," she said, "but if we're going to survive, we need to keep moving." Their breathing echoed in the cramped corridor, where every surface seemed to throb with each shaky exhale. The walls of the passage were made of the same pulsating, organic material, occasionally dotted with what looked like protrusions resembling veins or tendrils. A sparse glow emanated from these strange growths, bathing the group in sickly, fluctuating light. The woman with the cropped black hair, who had so far shown a sense of leadership, took point. Her expression remained tense, her gaze scanning each undulating wall for any sign of danger. Behind her trailed the first man who had spoken, still wincing from an unrelenting headache. The stocky man, the gaunt younger man, and another figure, a silent woman who had only just regained consciousness, brought up the rear. "What are we supposed to do?" the younger man asked, his voice quivering. He clutched at his arms as if cold. His eyes darted anxiously from one end of the corridor to the other. The stocky man grunted. "We find a way out. Or we find whoever or whatever built this place and make them give us answers." His tone carried a grim determination, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. The silent woman lagged a step behind, pressing her palm against the wall as though to steady herself. Her face was pale, and her suit glistened with a thin sheen of perspiration. A soft moan escaped her lips, drawing the attention of the others. "You okay?" the woman with cropped hair asked, her features softening momentarily. I think so," the quiet one replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just dizzy. It's like I can feel this place breathing." No one responded immediately. They all felt it, the unshakable sensation that they were not walking through a corridor of steel or concrete, but through the bowels of some gargantuan creature. The subtle wheezing in the air vents, the pulsing glow of the vein-like protrusions, each detail drove home the reality that they were very much inside a living maze. The first man cleared his throat. "Maybe we should keep track of our path somehow, so we don't end up going in circles." "That's not a bad idea," the woman with the cropped hair acknowledged, glancing over her shoulder. "Anyone see something we can use to mark our route?" They scanned their surroundings, but the corridor was devoid of any loose debris or solid objects. The walls quivered under their scrutiny, as if uncomfortable with being examined. Suddenly, a faint vibration coursed through the floor, and the corridor ahead seemed to twist, the walls folding in on themselves for a moment, before snapping back into place. "What was that?" the younger man hissed, stumbling backward. The others came to an abrupt halt, pressing themselves against the walls, feeling the shallow rhythm beneath their hands. "It's shifting again," the stocky man muttered. "Just like back in that first room." A distant rumble reached their ears, faint yet unmistakable, a hollow groan that sent a tremor through the corridor. The silent woman's breathing quickened, and she reflexively grabbed the first man's arm. "We can't stay here," the woman with the cropped hair said. trying to keep her voice steady. "Let's keep moving." She stepped forward, forcing one foot in front of the other. Each step made a nauseating squelch against the pliant ground. The corridor branched suddenly in two directions ahead, one to the left, one to the right. Both passages looked nearly identical, dark, pulsating walls and faint glimmers of pale light. "Which way?" the younger man asked, anxiety coloring his words. "Let's try left," the woman decided, her tone resolute. "We'll mark it somehow, even if we just scratch the wall." She turned to the stocky man. "You look strong, can you make a mark?" He nodded, stepping forward. With a grunt of effort, he raked his nails across the surface of the wall. It parted slightly, a thin wet line opening in the surface, then slowly oozed a dark substance that resembled blood. He grimaced. "That's our mark," he said, recoiling from the wall. "At least we'll know if we come back this way." They proceeded down the left corridor. The darkness seemed to press in on them from all sides, thick and suffocating. Their footsteps squelched and echoed, as though the corridor itself amplified their presence. Ahead, the space appeared to bend. Then, faintly at first, they heard something like a distant rasp, a scraping sound that gradually grew louder. It echoed off the living walls, sending shivers down their spines. "You hear that?" the first man whispered, his voice trembling with unease. They all nodded, fear etched into every face. The scraping sound grew closer, accompanied by another low groan from the corridor itself. The younger man peered down the passage, his voice cracking. "I don't see anything. But it's coming closer." Suddenly, a new noise tore through the air, a shriek of metal, or perhaps bone, scraping against something harder. It reverberated through the hallway, setting every nerve on edge. "Back! Back!" the woman with the cropped hair ordered, gesturing frantically for them to retreat. They stumbled a few steps, then pressed themselves against the wall. From around the bend came a flash of movement, a glimpse of something humanoid, but horribly distorted. Its limbs were elongated, the skin the same color as the pulsating walls. It darted across the corridor, making a wet, slithering sound. The group froze, barely daring to breathe. They waited, hearts pounding, as silence descended once more. Seconds stretched into a long, drawn-out hush. "What was that thing?" the younger man finally whispered. None of them had an answer. Terror hung thick in the stale air. "We can't go back," the stocky man said, shaking his head. "That void, whatever it is, might still be there." The woman with the cropped hair nodded. "We need to keep going. But we have to be careful." They resumed their forward march, each heartbeat echoing in their ears. The corridor wound deeper into the twisting, living architecture, the stench of decaying organic matter growing stronger. That same scraping, slithering sound lingered in the distance, never quite gone, never fully approaching. "Everyone stay close," the woman murmured. "If that thing is waiting for us, we don't want to get separated." With that warning hanging over them, they moved carefully through the corridor, each new step revealing more of the unsettling alien design. The walls pulsed and flexed, as though aware of their presence. They followed the bend, bracing for another glimpse of the creature, or worse only to find empty shadows. One thing was clear. They were not alone in this horrifying labyrinth. The question was whether they'd find a way out before the living vessel, or its nightmarish inhabitants, sealed their fate. They emerged into a wide, open chamber, a stark contrast from the cramped corridors they had just navigated. The ceiling here stretched upward into darkness, the walls arching organically like a cathedral formed of living tissue. Thin strands of what resembled sinew dangled from the ceiling, swaying as though in a faint breeze. A series of soft whispering sounds seemed to emanate from the far edges of the chamber, drifting through the shadows. At times, the whispers almost formed words, sending chills coursing down every spine. "What is this place?" the younger man muttered, peering nervously at the swaying strands. "It feels bigger here." No one answered right away, their senses reeling from the towering expanse. Each footstep echoed in a muted squelch against the pliant floor, which here felt thicker, more layered. The stocky man, visibly unsettled, clenched his fists in an effort to steady himself. "Spread out, but not too far," said the woman with the cropped hair, her gaze sweeping the area. Her voice softened slightly. "Watch each other's backs." They fanned out in cautious arcs, eyes darting around the chamber's periphery. The glow of vein-like protrusions that dotted the walls here was pale, almost sickly green. The silent woman drifted toward one side, drawn by a faint glimmer. "Hey," the first man said gently, noticing her breakaway. "Stay close." She nodded in acknowledgement, but continued to edge toward the shimmer. When her fingers brushed the wall, the surface twitched, and a wave of phosphorescent light rippled outward, illuminating a portion of the chamber. Everyone froze at the sight. The light crawled across the fleshy ceiling and revealed massive, pod-like structures. They hung in clusters from the highest arches, each one faintly transparent. Within them, dark silhouettes twitched. "Are those alive?" asked the younger man, his voice shaking. Before anyone could answer, the pods quivered. A trembling resonance pulsed through the air, accompanied by the echo of those eerie whispers. "This place is some sort of incubator," the stocky man observed in hushed tones. "Or a nest." The woman with the cropped hair gestured for the others to gather closer. "Whatever's inside those pods might not be friendly. We need to move carefully." Tentatively, they crept forward, weaving between dangling strands of sinew that swayed overhead. Their footfalls made wet, sticky sounds on the organic floor. Now and then, the pods jostled and a chorus of muffled, indistinguishable murmurs set their teeth on edge. A sudden hiss echoed from the far side of the chamber, and everyone crouched, heartbeats racing. Far across the floor, a shape moved, possibly the same creature they'd glimpsed in the corridor. It slithered behind a cluster of pods, out of sight. "Let's not get its attention," the first man whispered. He glanced at the woman with the cropped hair, who nodded in agreement. They pressed on, trying to skirt the perimeter of the chamber to avoid the pods. The silent woman clenched her jaw, her face contorted in silent terror. She paused, blinking as though trying to recall something, then shook her head and trudged on. "I feel like..." she began, then trailed off. Her voice wavered uncertainly, as though she wasn't sure of her own words. "I've been here before, but that's impossible." The younger man swallowed hard. "I keep getting these flashes," he confessed. "Like I'm remembering another place. Maybe a life before this, but it's all hazy." The woman with the cropped hair paused, pressing a hand to her temple. "Same here," she admitted. "Bits and pieces. Scenes of somewhere else. A city skyline. Then, I don't know. It's like it vanished into darkness." The stocky man ran a hand over his shaved scalp, anxiety flashing in his eyes. "Maybe we're all test subjects. Or they're messing with our memories. Something about this place. It feels engineered, not random." As they trudged along, the chamber seemed to stretch on, an interminable sea of fleshy walls and dangling pods. The muffled whispers grew louder in certain areas, then quieter in others, as if guiding them through some alien waltz. Each time the pods jostled overhead, the group braced, anticipating an attack. The tension mounted when they noticed a faint, throbbing glow emanating from a large opening at the far end of the chamber, as though an enormous door or gateway. The glow pulsed in rhythm with the living walls, beckoning them forward. "There," the first man said quietly. "That might be a way out." Cautiously, they moved toward the opening, each drawn by an unspoken need for answers. A wide, fleshy arch towered over them, and the throbbing glow flickered from within, casting elongated shadows across the chamber floor. Suddenly, one of the pods above them burst open with a wet pop. The group spun around just in time to see dark fluid rain onto the floor. A half-formed, twitching creature spilled out, writhing in agony. "Go!" the woman with the cropped hair yelled, her voice echoing through the chamber. She didn't wait to see what happened next. They sprinted for the archway, hearts pounding. More pods shifted overhead, the fleshy shells pulsing as if awakened by the disturbance. Terrified, the group hurtled a slick pile of organic goo and slid beneath the arch, disappearing into the pulsing glow. As soon as they crossed the threshold, the glow became blinding. A sudden wave of nausea and vertigo struck them, and the world spun out of focus. For one dreadful moment, it felt as though the living walls had collapsed around them, crushing their minds with some alien presence. Then, just as quickly, the sensation passed. Blinking the disorientation away, they found themselves in yet another corridor, this one vast, with columns of pulsating veins that stretched high into an unseeable ceiling. Collapsing to the floor, the younger man gasped for air. I thought it was going to kill us." The woman with the cropped hair steadied herself against a column, her breath ragged. "Not yet," she managed. "But we need to figure out this place, or it will." Uncertain of what awaited them in this new, unsettling space, they pressed on. Every step took them deeper into the unknown, and every rumble of the living walls reminded them that the vessel was far from a passive environment. One wrong turn, and they might be lost forever or worse. They pressed forward into the vast corridor, the columns of pulsating veins reaching so far overhead that the ceiling lay beyond their sight. Each column shone with a damp sheen, as though coated with some phosphorescent fluid that provided meager illumination. It was barely enough to see more than a few steps in front of them, but still preferable to absolute darkness. The woman with the cropped hair led them deeper, her hand trailing against one of the columns for balance. She grimaced as the living surface seemed to squirm under her touch. "This place," she murmured, her voice hushed as though afraid the walls might be listening. "It's shifting around us. It can morph into whatever it wants." The silent woman shook her head as if trying to clear it. She paused, pressing her palm to her temple. I keep feeling like I'm supposed to remember something important. But whenever I try, it's like a door slams shut in my mind." The stocky man glanced over at her. "You're not alone. We're all missing pieces. Might be safer not to remember. Who knows what kind of messed up stuff they did to us." A sudden shudder ran through the floor, causing them to stagger. Up ahead, a section of the wall peeled away, revealing what looked like a narrow aperture. The younger man squinted at the opening, anxiety etched across his face. "That wasn't there a moment ago," he whispered. The first man approached cautiously. "Should we go through?" The woman with the cropped hair peered inside. Beyond the threshold, the space looked even more organic, the walls shining with a slick, viscous coating. She let out a slow breath. "We might not have a choice," she said. "Every path so far has been forced on us." As if on cue, the columns around them quivered, and a low groan reverberated through the corridor, like a distant rumble of thunder. "All right," the stocky man grunted. "Let's see what fresh hell lies in there." They filed in one by one, the aperture closing behind them with a subtle squelch. The space within was tight, more tunnel-like than corridor, forcing them to hunch. The floor felt slimy, and the air grew thicker, heavy with a sour, pungent odor that clung to their senses. "God," the first man muttered, covering his nose. "It smells like rotting flesh." The gaunt younger man gagged, trying to breathe through his mouth. "I don't know how much more of this I can take." The tunnel sloped downward, spiraling like the intestine of some monstrous creature. The woman with the cropped hair took each step carefully, wary of the slick surface. Occasional tremors jolted them, as though the entire vessel was a living thing, disturbed by their presence. At last, the tunnel opened into a small cavern. The walls here were pitted, shallow craters and grooves, revealing what looked like sinewy fiber beneath the surface. Dim, flickering bioluminescence emanated from the walls, casting grotesque, dancing shadows. The silent woman took a wary step forward, her eyes drawn to a section of the wall that pulsed steadily. She blinked, something in her mind clicking into place. This is a memory chamber," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know how I know that, but I've seen it before." The others exchanged glances. "A memory chamber?" repeated the younger man, skepticism laced with hope. "So what this place can give us our memories back?" She exhaled shakily, running a hand along the fleshy ridges. "Or it can take them away. I'm not sure." The first man stepped beside her, gently touching the wall. A bizarre sensation pricked at his mind, tiny flashes of images, too rapid to decipher. He recoiled as if shocked. I felt something." "What did you see?" the woman with the cropped hair demanded. "Just fragments," he said, pressing a palm to his temple. "Bright lights. A stasis pod. People standing around me, talking in hushed voices. I couldn't make out what they were saying." The stocky man exchanged a look with the silent woman. "We were lab rats," he muttered bitterly. "This is all starting to feel like an experiment." They circled the chamber, each drawn to different sections of the pulsing walls, half hoping to unearth more clues about who they were and how they got here. As the gaunt younger man placed his hand on a gently throbbing patch of the wall, he gasped. His voice cracked as he struggled to describe what he saw. A city, with metal spires, cutting into the clouds. "I lived there. I know it." And then, he swallowed hard, stepping back with tears welling in his eyes. "I remember a flash of light. And then waking up in that first room." Their eyes met, each one reflecting the raw torment of half-realized memories. The woman with the cropped hair clenched her jaw. "We need to find a way to piece this together," she said. "This chamber might be our only shot at understanding what's really going on." They took turns touching various sections of the wall, bracing themselves for the mental onslaught. Some saw images of futuristic prisons. Others recalled having implants inserted into their skulls. Each memory arrived incomplete, floating just out of reach. But the more they interacted with the wall, the more the chamber itself responded. The fleshy surface began to radiate a dull glow, intensifying with each new contact. Suddenly, a dull resonant throb shook the cavern. The walls darkened, and a sibilant hiss filled the air. "What now?" the stocky man growled, eyes darting around. In the tunnel behind them, something scraped along the walls, drawing closer. The sound echoed like nails on wet glass. "Not here, not now," the younger man muttered, fear gripping his voice. "We can't fight in this cramped space." Without warning, an elongated limb slithered around the corner of the tunnel, searching the air like a blind serpent. It was the same sickening color as the walls, slick and dripping with viscous fluid. Then another limb joined it, both flailing as if seeking prey. The woman with the cropped hair backed away. "We have to move. Now." Her warning came too late. The limbs snagged the gaunt man by the arm, pulling him off balance. He yelped, trying to wrench himself free, but the creature tightened its grip. The silent woman lunged forward, grabbing hold of his other arm. "Pull!" the woman with the cropped hair barked. She and the first man rushed to assist, but the creature's strength was formidable. The gaunt man's scream filled the chamber. "Someone help me!" With a collective effort, they managed to tear him free just as more limbs squirmed through the tunnel opening. The stocky man unleashed a savage kick at the appendage, momentarily forcing it to recoil. "Go!" he roared. They sprinted toward the far side of the chamber, where a second tunnel branched off. Each step on the slick floor threatened to send them sprawling. Behind them, the creature's wet limbs slapped against the ground, pursuing with horrifying speed. As they dove into the new tunnel, the stocky man spun and scratched at the wall panel near the entrance, leaving a dark, oozing mark. "So we don't come back this way," he panted. The tunnel curved sharply, leading them away from the memory chamber and the relentless predator behind them. The air was still rank and humid, but at least they were alive. "It's not safe anywhere," the first man gasped, his voice trembling. "No," agreed the woman with the cropped hair, eyes flicking back to ensure they weren't followed. "We can't stop. Not until we find a way out or understand how to destroy this place." The silent woman stared into the darkness ahead. Behind her eyes lay a new determination, sparked by the half-remembered revelations of the chamber. She clenched her fists, resolve hardening her features. "We get out," she murmured. "And then, we make them pay." In the flickering half-light of the tunnel, the group pushed onward, each step echoing the same desperate question. Who had cast them into this living nightmare, and why? They continued down the tunnel, the organic walls glistening as if with fresh perspiration. The stocky man took the lead this time, moving with quiet determination. Behind him, the gaunt younger man still nursed a tender arm from his close brush with the creature in the memory chamber. The air grew warmer as they advanced, and a heavy musk pressed against their senses. Ahead, the passage fanned out into a large, domed chamber. The walls curved overhead in smooth arcs, faintly illuminated by clusters of oozing, bioluminescent pods that lined the perimeter. A dull buzzing sound reverberated, setting their teeth on edge. "What now?" muttered the gaunt younger man, eyeing the glowing pods warily. The woman with the cropped hair raised a hand to signal silence. Her eyes were fixed on the far side of the chamber, where a towering skeletal structure of interwoven sinews jutted from the floor, reaching high into the dome. They drew closer to the sinewy lattice, noting how it pulsed in time with the rhythmic hum that surrounded them. Its surface was studded with translucent orbs, each containing a flicker of light like tiny stars trapped in gel. "What is this place?" asked the first man, his voice barely above a whisper. "Another piece of the puzzle," said the silent woman, stepping forward. She ran her hand gently along one of the orbs, causing it to glow brighter. For an instant, her face went slack as if lost in a daydream. "You okay?" the stocky man asked, worry slipping into his gruff tone. She blinked, stumbling back. "I saw a city again," she murmured, trying to steady her breathing. But clearer this time. There was a skyline and ships flying overhead. The woman with the cropped hair glanced at the rest of the group. "Maybe these orbs store more memories," she ventured. "Fragments of whoever was taken." The younger man swallowed hard. "You think these hold people's minds?" "Possibly," replied the silent woman. She stared at the structure with a mix of dread and fascination. "Or what remains of them?" Cautious but curious, they spread out around the towering lattice. Each approached a different section, placing tentative fingers against the glimmering orbs. Flashes of images danced through their thoughts: hospitals, spaceports, alien landscapes. A collective gasp rose as the group realized these were not just human cities, but places from entirely different worlds. "We weren't the only ones," the woman with the cropped hair whispered, her eyes haunted. "This vessel, it's been taking people, creatures from across the galaxy." The stocky man's jaw clenched. "Prisoners. For experiments, maybe. Torture. Some twisted study." A soft clicking noise interrupted them. At first, it sounded like static, but it gradually grew into a more guttural chatter. The pods lining the walls began to undulate, as though responding to an unseen signal. "Hide!" hissed the first man. They dashed behind the lattice, crouching low. Their hearts pounded as the chattering approached. Slithering shapes emerged from a tunnel on the far side of the chamber, 3 of them, each bearing the same elongated limbs and slick flesh-toned skin. "Those things," the younger man mouthed, panic flaring in his eyes. One creature moved to the sinewy structure, touching it with spindly fingers. A sharp, trilling note escaped what might have been its mouth. The pods on the walls glowed in response. The silent woman peered around the lattice, biting her lip to keep from making a sound. The creature turned its head as though sniffing the air. Then, with surprising speed, it jerked its gaze directly toward their hiding spot. "Run!" breathed the woman with the cropped hair. They burst from cover, sprinting across the chamber. The creatures shrieked, their limbs flailing with unsettling fluidity. One lashed out, catching the gaunt younger man by the leg, but he tore free, pain twisting his face. Bolting toward a tunnel on the opposite side, they fled the chamber. The slithering pursuit continued behind them, guttural cries echoing. Each step hammered against the organic floor, adrenaline surging. At last, they rounded a bend, leaving the buzzing hive-like chamber behind. The tunnel narrowed again, forcing them to slow. The woman with the cropped hair paused to check if the creatures were still following. "Looks like we lost them," she whispered, pressing a hand to her chest to calm her racing heart. "But we found something in there," said the first man, his voice grim. "This place is bigger than we imagined, and it's not just about us. There could be hundreds, thousands of others, their memories trapped." The silent woman nodded, her gaze distant. "We need to do more than escape. If there's a chance to free them, or stop this vessel from taking more victims." Her words hung in the stale air, heavy with implication. One by one, they turned their eyes down the looming darkness of the tunnel, uncertain but resolute. The tunnel led them deeper still, sloping at a steep angle that tested their footing on the slippery, pulsing floor. With every downward step, the air grew hotter, and the walls became slick with thick, viscous fluid. A rancid smell clung to the humid atmosphere. The younger man coughed, trying not to retch. "Feels like we're heading straight into its gut," he muttered. Ahead, the stocky man shone a faint beam of light from a small device he'd found attached to his suit, wrist-mounted beacon they hadn't noticed before. It flickered unevenly, barely cutting through the haze. "Everyone be careful," the woman with the cropped hair warned. "If this place is alive, we could be walking into its heart. Or something worse." The silent woman held onto the wall for balance, her expression grim. "We should be ready for anything. We know there are creatures hunting us, and who knows what else lurks at the core." They trudged on, guided by the thin beam and the dull glow emitted by the living walls. A jolt suddenly rocked the tunnel, and the group stumbled, catching themselves against the pliant, heaving flesh. "An earthquake?" the younger man asked, voice trembling. "More like the vessels convulsing," said the first man. He glanced at the ceiling, half expecting it to clamp shut. Another jolt came, stronger this time. The floor rippled, and a wave of thick fluid gushed from vents along the walls, sloshing around their ankles. A nauseating stench assaulted their senses. "Move!" barked the stocky man, forging ahead through the rising sludge. They reached a widening in the tunnel, a kind of antechamber. The fluid pooled here, swirling with bits of organic debris. At the far end stood another pulsating aperture, but this one was lined with tooth-like protrusions that ground together, opening and closing in a sickening rhythm. The woman with the cropped hair grimaced. "Looks like the only way forward, or back." She took a tentative step toward the aperture, but it clamped shut, revealing rows of jagged, bony teeth. A guttural hiss issued from somewhere in the chamber, as though the vessel disapproved of their presence. "That can't be safe," the younger man said, eyes wide with horror. "We have to time it," the silent woman said, her voice flat with grim determination. "When it opens again, we go in before it can shut." The group shared uneasy looks. The memory of nearly being crushed by the closing walls still lingered. But they had little choice. The aperture opened, the bony teeth peeling apart with a slimy squelch. Without another word, the woman with the cropped hair dove through, landing on the other side with a splash of gelatinous fluid. "Come on," she yelled back. One by one, the others followed. The aperture slammed shut behind the gaunt younger man just as he cleared it, narrowly missing his heel. They found themselves in another corridor, this one glowing a dark crimson, as though lit by molten rock. The heat was oppressive, sweat beading on every brow. Strange clicking noises echoed through the passage, accompanied by deep, rhythmic pounding like a heartbeat heard through layers of flesh and bone. The first man wiped his forehead, eyes scanning the crimson walls. "We're close to something. I can feel it." The stocky man nodded. "And it might not be happy to see us." They pressed on, stepping carefully over the ridged floor. The corridor curved sharply, and they could hear the pounding grow louder, each thump vibrating through their bodies. Rounding the bend, they finally saw it, a gargantuan chamber, at the center of which pulsed a massive heart-like organ. Veins and arteries of living material fanned out from it, snaking into every corner of the vessel. The sight was both majestic and horrifying, a testament to the alien nature of their prison. "Is that the core?" the silent woman whispered. Before anyone could answer, the vessel shuddered again, and a roar echoed through the chamber. The organ began pulsing faster, each beat sending waves of energy through the fleshy walls. The younger man turned to the woman with the cropped hair. "What do we do? Destroy it?" She stared at the throbbing heart, uncertainty etched into her features. "If we kill it, do we kill everything? Including ourselves?" A sudden shriek cut through the air, and they turned to see more of those twisted creatures pouring in from multiple tunnels around the perimeter of the chamber. It seemed like half the living vessel was converging on this very spot to protect its core. The stocky man set his jaw. "We decide fast, or we won't have a choice." And so, surrounded by the vessel's last line of defense, and confronted with the pulsing heart that might be their key to escape, or their doom, they prepared to make a final stand. The creatures swarmed from every tunnel, limbs twisting and mouths opening in sickening, silent snarls. Their pale forms glistened in the crimson glow, each movement accompanied by wet, slithering noises that sent shivers down the survivors' spines. In the center of the chamber, the towering heart organ throbbed faster with every passing second. Veins around it dilated, pulsing in a grotesque dance. It was as though the vessel itself understood the threat and was mustering its defenses. "We have to make a choice," the woman with the cropped hair shouted over the din. "We can't outrun them forever." The stocky man scanned the chamber, eyes locking on an exposed cluster of arterial branches near the base of the giant organ. "That might be a weak point," he growled. "If we can damage it, maybe we can force this thing to open a path or kill it." The silent woman set her jaw. "If it dies, do we die with it?" A trembling hush fell as they all exchanged glances, each one wrestling with the same unanswerable question. The gaunt younger man finally spoke up, voice taut with desperation. "We don't have time to worry about that. If we stay here, we die anyway." A piercing shriek echoed behind them, and one of the creatures lunged, swiping with its elongated limb. The first man ducked, then kicked it away, grimacing at the slick texture of its skin. "Fine," the woman with the cropped hair snapped, nodding at the stocky man. "Go for the arteries. We'll buy you time." Without hesitation, he sprinted toward the pulsating base of the heart organ. Another creature blocked his path. He barreled into it with a powerful shoulder, sending it sprawling in a wet heap. The silent woman and the younger man followed in his wake, each fending off slithering appendages with desperate strikes. Meanwhile, the woman with the cropped hair and the first man formed a defensive line, doing their best to keep the rest of the horde at bay. Horrid shrieks filled the chamber as more creatures poured in. Their eyes glowed with a dull predatory sheen in the crimson light. The first man grabbed a stray rod of sharp bone jutting from the fleshy wall, swinging it like a club. "There's too many," he cried, breathing hard. "Just hold on," she yelled back, heart pounding. "We can't let them reach the others." At the heart's base, the stocky man plunged his fists into the pulsing arteries with a grimace, dark fluid spraying across his suit. The organ recoiled, and the entire chamber trembled. A roar of fury seemed to vibrate through the walls. "Keep going," the silent woman urged. She turned to swipe at a creature that lunged for the stocky man's back, raking the bone rod across its chest. The thing screeched, staggering away. The gaunt younger man jabbed another cluster of arteries with a jagged shard of bone, teeth gritted in terror and determination. "It's working," he gasped. "I think." A fresh wave of creatures spilled into the chamber, drawn by the vessel's distress. Their movements were more frantic now, as though they felt the threat to their living home. One latched onto the younger man's ankle, pulling him down. With a snarl, the silent woman drove her improvised weapon into its neck, forcing it to release him. He scrambled back to his feet, adrenaline surging. Across the chamber, the woman with the cropped hair and the first man continued their desperate stand. A vicious blow sent one attacker skittering across the slick floor, but two more took its place. Suddenly, the entire chamber convulsed, nearly throwing them off balance. As the stocky man ripped away another arterial branch, the organ spewed dark liquid. The roar reached a fever pitch, echoing through the tunnels beyond. Then it happened. The massive heart organ began to shrivel, its once thunderous beating stuttering in an irregular gasping rhythm. Arteries retracted into the walls, and the floor underfoot started to quake violently. A deafening crack resounded through the chamber. The creatures shrieked in unison, some collapsing, others fleeing back into the tunnels as though sensing the imminent collapse. "We've done it!" the stocky man roared, staggering free of the tangle of arteries. "Now let's get the hell out of here." But the question remained, where was out? Every tunnel entrance they saw teemed with panicked creatures or collapsing flesh. The vessel was dying, and it was dragging everything down with it. "Over there!" the first man shouted, pointing to a gap in the chamber wall where part of the organic structure had torn away, revealing what looked like an opening. The group converged at the edge of the chamber, fighting back straggling creatures. With the vessel in its death throes, the walls gaped and shredded, offering a precarious route beyond. Streams of thick fluid poured out, and the floor buckled beneath them. One by one, they leapt through the breach, landing in a narrow channel of twisting veins that convulsed spasmodically. The heat was overwhelming, and the stench of decay burned their throats. Behind them, the heart organ let out a final thunderous boom, then fell silent. The woman with the cropped hair stumbled forward, leading the way. "Keep moving," she urged, voice ragged. They tore down the channel, each step threatening to submerge them in the vessel's liquefying innards. The corridor pitched violently to one side, nearly slamming them into the wall. At last, the tunnel ended in a rupture that spilled into empty darkness. The survivors hesitated, but the corridor behind them was already collapsing. With a shared glance of terrified resolve, they jumped. A brief moment of freefall ensued, dark, dizzying, and fraught with the possibility of imminent death. Then, suddenly, a brilliant light consumed their vision. They awoke sprawled across a cold metallic floor, the air crisp and distinctly artificial. Emergency lights flickered overhead, illuminating a large bay or hangar of some sort. The suit that once felt like second skin now seemed battered and torn. The woman with the cropped hair groaned, pushing herself up on one elbow. "Where are we?" The first man rubbed his eyes, fighting off waves of vertigo. "It looks like a ship's cargo hold." Dazed, the stocky man staggered to his feet, eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. On the far wall, alien glyphs glowed faintly, reminiscent of the vessel's living architecture, but this place was undeniably metallic, constructed. "We're not in that thing anymore," whispered the younger man, relief and confusion mingling in his voice. "How did we get here?" In the corner of the bay, a large viewport revealed a star-dappled void. They were in space, that much was clear, but the vessel they now occupied, no resemblance to the biological prison they had just escaped. The silent woman walked slowly toward the viewport, resting a hand on the reinforced glass. "We jumped out of a rupture. But where did it lead us?" Behind them, a door hissed open. An alien figure, clad in sleek metallic armor, stepped cautiously into the bay. It was bipedal, vaguely humanoid, but its eyes were large and pitch black. It raised a three-fingered hand in what might have been a gesture of peace. The survivors tensed, uncertain whether to attack or flee. But the figure merely pressed a button on a device strapped to its wrist, and a droning hum filled the air. Then came words translated, albeit haltingly, into their language. "You are safe. The prison is destroyed." They exchanged uncertain looks. The silent woman stepped forward. "Who are you?" The alien tilted its head. "We have been watching. The vessel was a tool of torment, used by many warlike species. We have studied it from afar. It has claimed many lives." A flicker of guilt or sorrow crossed its features, if that was even possible for its species. "Your arrival, unexpected. We rescued you as the vessel collapsed, teleported." The woman with the cropped hair swallowed hard, her mind reeling at the revelation that advanced alien technology had plucked them from certain doom. She glanced back at her companions, each looking equally stunned. "So, it's over? We're free?" asked the gaunt younger man. "For now," the alien replied. "There are others. Other vessels. We do what we can." Silence stretched out. The survivors digested the fact that they had escaped one horror, only to discover a vast network of similar nightmares across the cosmos. The stocky man let out a bitter laugh. "So we're free to do what exactly? Go home? Do we even have homes left?" The alien's large eyes blinked in puzzlement. "We will take you to known starports. You must find your people." One by one, memories began to surface, fragmented recollections from the memory chambers. Different worlds, different histories, different crimes or tragedies that had led them to the vessel's grasp. They looked at one another. The only bond they had now was survival. "We'll figure it out," the woman with the cropped hair said softly, mustering a resolve she wasn't sure she had. "Wherever we end up." She offered her hand first to the silent woman, then to the others. One by one, they clasped hands, forming a small circle of battered survivors. The alien observer watched them, then gestured toward the open corridor. "Come. We must leave this sector. Dangers remain." As they followed the alien into the corridor, the tension lifted only slightly. They had escaped the living prison that had threatened to devour them. Yet the broader universe now stretched out before them, infinitely vast, infinitely dangerous. Their futures were uncertain, but at least they faced them together. In the wake of the vessel's demise, a silent vow formed in each survivor's heart, that they would not rest until they uncovered the truth behind these living abominations and ensured that no one else would suffer the fate they barely escaped. They were free. For now.